The January transfer window has not been kind to Celtic. It has been a torrid year in terms of transfers too for the 2020-21 season. Things haven't quite panned out the way they have.
That literally made zero sense. I meant to say things haven't panned out the way they should have. So, aye, let's ignore that mistake.
But we're dying for signings now as we enter the winter transfer window. Celtic need to make improvements. We know the areas that we need to improve on, but as I said at the top of the video, the January transfer window seems to be a curse for Celtic. We have signed some absolute stinkers over the years, and that's why today I've decided to do something a bit special, a bit of a feature for you. We're going to look through the 10 worst signings in the January transfer window for Celtic Football Club. Now, the January transfer window only became a thing in 2002. That's when transfer windows became a thing, so everything is from 2002 onwards. And yes, there has been some good players now and then that have signed in the January transfer window. Eric Sviatchenko comes to the top of my head because he was just a king. But there has overwhelmingly been an amount of garbage that is signed for Celtic in this window. So we need to change that this season. We need to sign some talent to try and get ourselves in with a shot of going for this title. It's not going to happen, but you know what, we can try. Anyway, in no particular order, let's have a look at the 10 worst signings to sign for Celtic in a January transfer window.
Start this off as Willo Flood. Yep, Willo Flood. Is that not enough? I mean, what else is there to say about this guy? To some, a cult figure at Celtic. A man who will go down as a hero, a Celtic legend. He signed in the winter transfer window of 2009 and only lasted a year at the club, only making 9 appearances. There's an undisclosed fee. There's figures thrown about everywhere. I've seen everything between 100 grand to 600 grand. Somewhere saying 1.3 million. Who knows what the true figure was, but at the end of the day, I can tell you this. It was absolute dog meat. Went on to have an astonishing career outside of Celtic, of course. Signed for Middlesbrough the following winter transfer window, but he signed for Dunfermline, and only 4 days later, he had left Dunfermline. And that says everything you need to know about the man, the myth, the legend that is Willo Flood. A man who had so much promise coming into Celtic from Cardiff City. It didn't really work out for him, and we'll always remember the man who I will look at as a Wish.com version of Lord Voldemort. Next up, Edson Braafheid, a man who's appeared on the channel before in a similar style of video. He made it into the worst 11 of the decade that I done last year, and he makes it in here with his loan signing in the 2010 January transfer window. Tony Mowbray brought him in hoped that he would help solve our defensive issues. He didn't do that. He was rotten. He made a fair account of himself on his debut. 2 assists and a 4-2 win over Dunfermline, but a former World Cup player signing from Bayern Munich, you would expect so much more. Didn't help that Bayern Munich went on to go and make the Champions League final that year. They went on to good heights, and he had to watch as a Celtic reserve after he was booted out the first team. He threw his toys out the pram at Hampden in that loss to Ross County before the game even kicked off, and he stormed out the changing room. His Celtic career was remembered for that and that alone, and it turned out just to be a bust, and someone who had such high potential coming to Celtic flopped like none other. 12 appearances in total he ended up making for Celtic, and yeah, he didn't do much. Morten Rasmussen, there's a throwback out. He signed for Celtic for a fee between £1 and £1.5 million, which in the year 2010 was quite expensive. Tony Mowbray did put some money down for this boy. He then came in to do nothing. He signed in the same transfer window as Robbie Keane, and if there was any chance of him getting the team over Robbie Keane, yeah, it wasn't going to happen for him. He ended up getting loaned out 3 times over his course at Celtic, and all 3 loan moves failed, all at Mainz, Aalborg and Sivasspor. It just never worked out for him, and I think over his time at Celtic he gathered about 12 appearances. He did get a goal, he did, in fact he got 3, but for £1.5 million, Morten Rasmussen did not live up to the expectation. Everybody thought once Keane left he would get a chance. Nope, Neil Lennon came in and didn't really tickle his fancy. Poor Morten, man. I wanted to see more of him. I actually feel quite bad for making this an entry, but we're putting in Pavel Brozek because he was absolutely rotten. A lot of people actually dub him one of the worst players we've had over the past 10 years, but the guy never really had a chance. We didn't even spend much money on him. It was a loan, so we only had to pay a small fee. Look, he came in the 31st of January 2012. 300 grand was spent, but he came in and had, 3 appearances. Didn't impress in any of those. And you know, even youth players were overshadowing him. He was a lazy character. And do you know what? Somehow, he managed to do it at an international level for Poland, but he just never done it for Celtic, and sadly has to come on this list. Jeremy Toljan. This was what I got so excited for. As a man who likes Borussia Dortmund, I had the feeling that Jeremy Toljan was going to come into Celtic and be the best fullback the league had ever seen. It almost mirrors what I thought about Shane Duffy coming to Celtic this year. Jeremy Tolyan simply wasn't good enough, and he's, went on to struggle a little bit too after leaving Celtic. The big moment that we'll always remember him for is that red card against Valencia. We were on top of them for basically the whole game. Then he got sent off, and it changed the complexion of a tie we were fighting our way back into. Yep, he simply wasn't good enough. And another one that's just a loan signing, but Brendan Rodgers instilled a lot of faith in him. I imagine there was a decent fee getting paid there. And you know what, let's just forget that it ever happened, because it was such a letdown. Still to this day, I question why Celtic signed Colin Kazim-Richards. He was one of the signings that really kind of epitomised why the time for Ronnie Deila was coming, and we had to change manager. Signings like him, Carlton Cole, Nadir Chifchi, it was just not added up. Colin Kazim-Richards, a journeyman, he'd been literally everywhere before coming to Celtic, and it was baffling that we ever took him on. Came into Celtic and managed to make 13 appearances, scoring 2 goals, and one of those was a brilliant goal at Tynecastle. I don't know if you remember it, but take away that, I mean, he should never have been a Celtic player. He was never good enough. Apparently, he never even got on with the manager and the team that well. There was that kind of talk of unrest between them, and he didn't really fit in. We all knew it was never going to be a long-term thing. He was only there between the January and the end of the season, and he wasn't even involved in the last game of the season where we pumped Motherwell 7-0. Wasn't on the bench. It seemed it would never work for him at Celtic, and honestly, utterly baffling we ever signed him. Talk about feeling bad for putting people in this list. I do feel bad for this, but it has to be done. It is justified. £3.1 million was spent on Kouassi Abui in the January transfer window of 2017. A man who had such a, it was such a what could have been story. We had so much hope. Brendan Rodgers, we thought he'd be the man to get the best out of this boy, and injuries did not help him, but for signing for £3.1 million to then go on and only make 22 appearances for the club is simply not a justifiable amount of games for the fee that we paid. The big injury coming at Murrayfield was what done him in. And do you know what? If he didn't get injured that day, he might have went on to have a run at Celtic and might have done something, but it just didn't work out. It turned out to be one of the biggest flops we've had in the past few years. Will he go on and do well now at Genk alongside Mark McKenzie? We'll wait and see, but just didn't work at Celtic. Jack Hendry. Right, I have been so critical of Jack Hendry on this channel so many times in the past. You all know my opinions on him if you've been here long enough. But apparently he's doing quite well now over in Belgium, but do I think he's the answer to Celtic centre-backs' problems? No. Do I think he ever will be good enough to be the answer? No. And I've always said for a long time, I firmly believe he could be the worst player I've ever seen in a Celtic shirt. Apart from Shane Duffy now. But Jack Hendry I've always been so critical of, and signing the January transfer window for a decent fee from Dundee was just never justified, and it always baffled me. What did we see in him? Do you remember him trying to dribble with the ball? I think it was against Partick Thistle or something. Jeez, I'm done. I can't speak any longer. Charlie Musonda. My, oh my, oh my. I mean, this was meant to be the biggest thing ever. The fact that we'd done this. We actually managed to loan in the wonder kid from Chelsea. It was the January of 2017. I've never been happier. Celtic were playing the best football we've ever seen. And then suddenly, we get this signing that makes it all the better. And he just comes in to do absolutely nothing. At the end of the day, he was just bullied up here. It didn't work out for him. I don't know if it did come down to the fact he wasn't strong or big enough and players could easily get him off the ball. It just didn't work out the way that the prophecy had foretold. So it was a disaster. And it was so annoying. I mean, the only moment that really stands out in a positive note was that assist against Zenit St Petersburg for Cal McGregor. That was unbelievable. But domestically, he just didn't do it, and his chances started to dwindle, and soon we seen he wasn't good enough. So poor Charlie, just didn't work out, and there was quite a decent amount of money on that. And finally, Marvin Comper. Right then, that does it for this video, and as you can see, the January transfer window has been stinking nonetheless, and that's only 10. You know, that list was chopped down quite a bit. There were so many names that I've left out. So just think about that for a minute. If you have enjoyed though, make sure to hit like and subscribe. It is much appreciated, and keep up the support of the channel. It's been great recently through live streams and through the videos themselves and everywhere else in the podcast channel. Thank you so much, and I'll see you all next time.